The price of oil just spiked over $100 a barrel, and control of the entire U.S. House of Representatives might just come down to 6,000 voters in Pennsylvania.
It is, it's the ultimate butterfly effect, honestly.
Right. I mean, we are sitting here in mid-April 2026, and the news is moving so fast, it's just almost impossible to process. Like, just look at the global board right now. The U.S. Navy is actively blockading Iranian ports after peace talks completely collapsed.
Which is massive.
Totally. And because of that blockade, oil prices just surged past that $100 mark, which means every single person listening to this is going to feel it at the gas pump by, tomorrow morning.
Absolutely.
Meanwhile, you go on Truth Social, and President Trump is aggressively touting U.S. oil reserves while in, the exact same breath, launching this digital attack on the Pope.
Yeah, and if you look at Washington, D.C., in the middle of all this international panic, the domestic political machinery is just imploding.
Literally imploding. I mean, Representative Eric Swalwell just suddenly resigned from Congress amid this massive scandal involving a leaked video from a French Riviera yacht.
Right.
So you have naval blockades, an energy crisis, and wild congressional scandals all colliding at the exact same time.
Which is precisely why those 6,000 voters in Pennsylvania are suddenly the most important people in the country.
Yeah.
Because when you have this level of global turmoil, the fragility of the U.S. House of Representatives becomes the central pressure point. I mean, the House is divided by an absolute razor's edge right now.
Like, down to the seat.
Exactly. A single resignation, like we just saw, or a single flipped seat, that dictates whether a massive national energy policy moves forward to combat this oil crisis, or whether it just hits a brick wall.
And that brings us to our mission today. We are taking a deep dive into Pennsylvania's 10th Congressional District, PA-10. This is the battleground that could literally decide which party holds the gavel.
It's a critical district.
It really is. And we pulled a massive stack of sources to figure out what is actually happening on the ground there. We're looking at local reporting from WITF in Harrisburg, race data from the Co-Political Report, candidate spotlights, Wikipedia entries, and official party press releases.
Yeah, we are looking at sources from across the entire political spectrum today, from, hyperlocal activist blogs all the way to national party talking points.
Right. And before we dig in, I want to be incredibly clear with you, the listener. Our job here is not to tell you who is right or who you should root for.
No, definitely not.
Our job is to put all these competing realities on the operating table, dissect them, and just figure out how modern political campaigns actually function. We're going to look at the mechanics, the money, and the strategies.
And the mechanics of PA-10 are fascinating because it basically operates like a laboratory for American politics. You have 3 candidates running 3 entirely different models of campaigns.
Okay, well, let's start with the guy currently holding the seat. So, Scott Perry is the Republican incumbent. And when you look at his 2024 election numbers, he survived a massive near upset.
He really did.
He captured just 50.5% of the vote. In a district of nearly 800,000 people, he won by a margin of only about 6,000 votes.
Yeah, and that razor-thin margin puts a giant target on his back. Statistically speaking, he is one of the most vulnerable Republicans in the entire country.
But, he is not going down without a serious fight. He has the full backing of the national GOP infrastructure. The National Republican Congressional Committee, the NRCC, is heavily invested here.
Very heavily.
And to understand what that actually means, we need to look at his bank account. Because in the first quarter of 2025, Perry raised $565,000. He entered April with over $500,000 in cash on hand.
Which is a huge number, and the NRCC is pointing to that $500,000 as perch that his base is highly motivated. And, the function of the NRCC here is crucial.
Right.
They aren't just a cheerleader for him. They are a massive financial and strategic shield. They provide polling data, they coordinate super PAC spending, and they signal to wealthy conservative donors nationwide that Perry is a worthwhile investment.
But, okay, here is what I don't get. If he has all this national backing and he's raising $500,000 in a single quarter, why is his seat still so vulnerable?
Well, it's mostly because of the voting record he's built to keep that conservative base energized in the first place. It is a highly calculated risk.
Okay, how so?
So Perry sponsored the Life at Conception Act, which is a strict anti-abortion stance. He also voted against major bipartisan infrastructure bills, and notably, he voted against veteran aid specifically, health benefits for soldiers exposed to toxic burn pits.
Oh, wow. I want to pause on that burn pit vote, actually, because On paper, voting against veteran health benefits in a district with a strong military presence, that just seems like political suicide. Why would a vulnerable incumbent do that?
Mechanically, it is all about ideological purity. Often, those veteran benefit provisions are attached to massive trillion-dollar omnibus spending packages.
Ah, I see.
Right, so if a candidate's core brand is being a strict fiscal hawk who fights government spending, voting for that massive package alienates their most passionate donors and primary voters.
Right.
In midterm elections, where overall turnout is lower, campaigns rely on those passionate, hyper-engaged voters actually showing up.
So he is prioritizing the enthusiasm of his core base over, like, the broad appeal to the middle. And we also have to factor in his connection to Donald Trump here. I mean,
Yeah.
Perry had his cell phone seized by the FBI due to his efforts to contest the 2020 election results.
Which is another perfect example of this mechanical trade-off.
How so?
Well, to moderate, persuadable suburban voters, an FBI phone seizure is a massive red flag. But to a grassroots conservative donor who feels the justice system has been weaponized against their party, that exact same FBI seizure turns Perry into a martyr.
Which actually drives up his fundraising numbers.
Exactly.
So it sounds to me like Perry isn't just walking a political tightrope. He is walking a tightrope while carrying a very heavy backpack of controversy. Or, actually, no, it's like he's trying to patch leaks in a dam using duct tape.
Right.
Like every time he leans further right to please his base and secure that funding, he springs a new leak with moderate suburbanites.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it. He's constantly trying to manage the water pressure.
Okay, so if you are the Democratic Party and you see this vulnerable Republican struggling to plug holes in the dam, what kind of weapon do you deploy to just break the dam completely?
You deploy a massive, highly polished, incredibly well-funded establishment machine. You deploy Janelle Stelson.
Right.
She is Perry's main Democratic challenger, and her fundraising numbers completely eclipse his. By late 2025, Stelson had raised a staggering $2.2 million.
Wow.
Yeah, she outraised the incumbent for 2 consecutive quarters.
$2.2 million for a House seat. That is just a gargantuan amount of cash. How does a campaign even spend $2 million in central Pennsylvania?
Mostly on defining the narrative before your opponent can. I mean, $2 million buys you saturation.
Like everywhere you look.
Exactly. It means you can buy premium, unskippable digital ads on YouTube for every single registered independent in the district. It means you can buy out local broadcast television slots during primetime football games. It basically allows you to build a wall of sound.
And the messenger is just as important as the money here, right? Because Stelson brings 40 years of immense name recognition to the table.
Unmatched name recognition, really.
Yeah, she was a local broadcast journalist and the evening news anchor for WGAL. For 4 decades, the people of central Pennsylvania have literally invited this woman into their living rooms every single night.
And you just cannot put a price tag on that level of pre-existing trust. Usually, a challenger has to spend their first $1 million just introducing themselves to the voters.
Just to say, hi, I'm here.
Right. But Stelson skips that step entirely. And her platform is precision-engineered to appeal to the exact moderate voters leaking away from Scott Perry's dam. She is running firmly in the center. In fact, she was a lifelong registered Republican. She formally changed her registration to Democrat in 2023.
And the sources show her breaking point was the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. Reproductive rights are, like, the absolute center of her campaign strategy.
Along with a very pragmatic economic pitch, she supports raising the federal minimum wage of $7.25, increasing the child care tax credit, and pushing higher taxes on large corporations to ease the burden on the middle class.
And look at her stance on immigration, which, given our current news cycle, is a massive flashpoint right now.
Yeah.
She takes a surprisingly strict centrist approach for a Democrat.
She does.
She wants to heavily fund border security. And she stated clearly in a recent debate that undocumented immigrants currently in the country need to be sent home.
It is a platform explicitly designed to capture fatigued moderates, and the National Democratic Party loves it. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the DCCC, added her to their highly competitive Red to Blue program.
Okay, I see that phrase red to blue in political reporting all the time.
Yeah.
Mechanically speaking, what does that actually do for a candidate besides just giving them a nice badge on their website?
It is basically a VIP pass to the national party's secret armory.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, being on the red to blue list means the DCCC parachutes in their top-tier data scientists to analyze voter rolls. They get access to discounted ad rates. It also signals to massive institutional donors in New York and California that this candidate is thoroughly vetted and a safe place to park their maximum legal donations.
That makes sense.
Plus, she also secured endorsements from major powerhouses like Governor Josh Shapiro and over a dozen powerful labor unions.
Okay, I have to jump in here and push back a bit, because on paper, Stelson sounds like a political terminator. She has the TV anchor trust, the moderate pivot, the $2 million, and the national party backing. But when you look at the local reporting, she actually has some glaring vulnerabilities. First, property tax records show she still owns a home in Lancaster County.
Which is outside the 10th Congressional District she is actually running to represent.
Right. That is a classic devastating attack line in local politics.
Yeah.
You know, she doesn't even live here. And then there's the live television issue. If you're on live TV for 40 years, you are going to create a blooper reel.
Inevitably.
But in politics, a blooper reel is an attack ad. The sources highlight a specific incident regarding a cat cafe in Belgium.
Yeah, a deeply uncomfortable moment on air.
Her co-anchor mentioned that the idea of a cat cafe was popularized in Asian countries, and Stelson replied on live television, of course because they're making tacos out of them. But yeah, she apologized, pointing out it was one inappropriate joke from a decade ago out of thousands of hours of broadcasting, but immigrant advocacy groups absolutely tore into her for it. So my question to you is, does $2 million just act as a giant eraser for those kinds of red flags?
It does not erase them, no, but it drowns them out.
Ah.
In modern campaigns, volume defeats perfection. The out-of-district house and the offensive joke are vulnerabilities, yes. But with $2 million, every time her opponent runs a 30-second attack ad about the cat joke, Stelson can run 5 ads talking about her defense of reproductive rights. She controls the airwaves.
That is a huge advantage.
It is, but you are right to point out those vulnerabilities because they matter intensely in a primary election where voters are much more ideological.
Which perfectly transitions us to the third candidate in this race, who is fighting a two-front war. While Stelson is aiming at the Republican incumbent, she is being flanked on her left by Justin Douglas. He is running as the ultimate grassroots disruptor.
Yeah, Douglas is currently a Dauphin County commissioner, and he is running a campaign explicitly built on rejecting the exact political machine that Stelson embraces. He purposefully refuses to accept any special interest donations.
Which means his bank account is running on fumes compared to Stelson.
Ah.
By late December 2025, Douglas had only raised about $85,000.
Yeah, Stelson outraised him 25 to 1.
Now, explain this to me. How do you run a congressional campaign on $85,000? I mean, that is barely enough to buy a week of primetime TV ads in the Harrisburg market.
Well, you don't buy TV ads. You run an entirely different mechanism called relational organizing.
Okay.
With $85,000, you are printing clipboards, you're buying pizza for volunteers, and you're paying for cheap gas to drive to neighborhood meetings. Douglas is relying on direct community outreach, and he points to his own history as proof of concept.
Right.
Because he flipped his Dauphin County commissioner seat after a century of continuous Republican control, and he did it while being heavily outspent.
And his contrast with Stelson is sharpest on the issue of immigration. Like where Stelson says undocumented immigrants need to go home, Douglas is leaning heavily into immigrant rights. He is backed by major advocacy groups, including CASA in Action and the Asian Pacific Islander Political Alliance.
And we need to explain what an endorsement from a group like CASA in Action actually means on the ground.
Yeah, what does that look like?
They do not just hand a candidate a giant novelty check. They provide an army. They supply dozens of highly motivated, often bilingual organizers who will knock on thousands of doors in working-class neighborhoods that television ads simply do not reach.
And the local reporting from WITF provided a really powerful, tangible example of how this plays out. In 2025, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, IC, arrested and deported a group of Bhutanese refugees from the area. While most local politicians stayed completely silent, claiming federal immigration enforcement was, out of their jurisdiction, Douglas actually stepped up.
He held a public press conference to draw attention to the deportations.
Not only that, he actually coordinated to help the families visit their loved ones in the county jail one last time before they were flown out of the country and rendered stateless. He has centered his entire campaign on having the capacity for basic human empathy.
Right.
And at the exact same time, those immigrant advocacy groups say Stelson repeatedly refused to even meet with them to discuss her policy platform.
It creates a massive ideological divide for Democratic primary voters. You have the polished machine candidate offering strict border policies to win the general election, and the underfunded grassroots candidate actively advocating for deported refugees in his community. Douglas uses this contrast to paint Stelson as part of a cold, calculating, uncaring political apparatus.
Yeah, and Douglas has this catchphrase he uses constantly on the trail: "Dollars don't vote, people do." It's a fantastic bumper sticker.
Yeah.
But I have to challenge this.
Okay.
Empathy is inspiring, sure, but empathy doesn't buy the sophisticated data models you need to track mail-in ballots. Can pure grassroots energy actually defeat a $2 million machine in modern politics?
Historically, it is an incredibly steep mountain to climb.
I bet.
Money funds the boring, invisible infrastructure that actually wins elections. Money identifies the voters, calls them on the phone, and ensures they mail in their ballots on time. Empathy inspires a crowd, absolutely, but money builds the harvester that turns that inspiration into counted votes.
So is Douglas just a spoiler then?
Not necessarily a spoiler, but a severe complication. Even if Douglas doesn't win the primary, his presence forces Stelson to spend her massive war chest defending her left flank. She has to spend money proving her Democratic credentials to primary voters before she can even focus entirely on the Republican incumbent, Scott Perry.
Which brings us to the ultimate question. Why does PA-10 matter so much to the rest of the country? If you live in California or Texas or Florida, why should you care about this specific slice of Pennsylvania?
Because PA-10 is the demographic blueprint for the entire United States. The district is anchored by Harrisburg and includes parts of Cumberland and York counties. It is a dense mix of urban, rural, and suburban voters. And the single most important trend in modern American politics is happening right there. The suburbs are steadily drifting away from the Republican Party.
And because that 2024 margin was so incredibly tight, just 6,000 votes separated the winner from the loser, every single shifting household matters.
Exactly. The political behavior in these suburbs is highly fluid. You have persuadable independent voters, and you have moderate Republican voters who are just exhausted by extreme partisanship. Those specific voters dictate the outcome of the entire race.
Wow.
If they get frustrated and stay home, the conservative incumbent wins. If they swing to the center, the heavily funded challenger wins.
So if you've ever wondered why a candidate you've never heard of suddenly beats a heavily funded incumbent in your own town, this district shows you the exact playbook. We are watching three distinct philosophies of power colliding in real time. You have Scott Perry relying on his staunch, ideological conservative base to hold the line against demographic shifts. You have Janelle Stelson building a $2 million media empire, aiming straight for the pragmatic center. And you have Justin Douglas trying to break the whole system with a clipboard and an army of passionate volunteers.
It is a perfect microcosm. The national party machines are pouring millions upon millions of dollars into these tiny local districts because the balance of power in Washington is hanging by a thread.
Which connects directly back to you, the listener. Because whether you live in a suburb of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, or thousands of miles away in a different time zone, the outcome of these hyper-competitive 6,000-vote swing districts ultimately decides the national policies that govern your everyday life.
Yeah, the people who claw their way to victory in these razor-thin districts are the ones who cast the deciding votes in Congress.
Exactly.
They're the ones who decide whether the federal minimum wage stays at $7 or goes up. They decide the tax brackets for your small business. They dictate how the United States handles the border.
And they decide how we handle foreign policy. When the U.S. Navy blockades a port in the Middle East, the fallout from that decision eventually hits the floor of the House of Representatives. The people making the call on how to respond to that global oil shock are the exact same people fighting over a few thousand votes in Pennsylvania. The local truly becomes the global, and the global crashes right back down into the local.
It is all completely interconnected.
We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into PA-10. We've dissected the campaign bank accounts, the political tightropes, and the ground game strategies. But as we sit back and watch millions of dollars of national party money flooding into these local neighborhoods to influence just a handful of swing voters, it raises a big question for you to think about.
Yeah.
Do our representatives end up serving the actual everyday people living in their backyards? Or when the dust settles, do they ultimately serve the massive national party machines that paid for their campaigns? Think about those 6,000 voters and what $100 for a barrel of oil really means for the future of the House. We will see you next time.